Fast fact. Since this episode originally aired, Dan successfully achieved his goal of becoming an Olympian in the 2026 Winter Games, competing in both the individual and the first mixed team events. I'm Drew Thomas, and you're listening to Bank Chats. I wanted to start the conversation with you just using a question that you're probably not going to be expecting.
Okay.
So how many siblings do you have?
I have one.
You have one sibling?
Yes.
Okay, so would your parents say, honestly, that, like, what would they say if I said to them, who's your favorite child?
Well, obviously, me.
Would they say that, though? Or would they?
Well, so if my sister wasn't in the room, yes.
Okay.
But if she was in the room, I think they'd leave the room.
Okay, so
yeah.
so they wouldn't say the whole, like, you know, all my kids, I love my children all equally. Would they, like?
Oh, they probably would say that. Yeah, you're right.
I think a lot of parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason that I say this, because I said this was unconventional. The reason I say this is because I don't have multiple children, but
Okay.
I do feel sometimes whenever we talk about these discussions and episodes that, you know, I love all my children equally.
Uh-huh.
But I think today is going to be kind of cool because we have a guest that is really above and beyond what we normally have on this.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
So today we actually have a person that is really making me reconsider my diet.
And he makes me feel like my life is pretty, like, meaningless.
So today we have with us, we have Dan Barefoot with us, and Dan Barefoot is a member of the U.S. It's a U.S. skeleton team, correct?
Yep.
What's the official, like, moniker? Is that it?
USA Bobsled and Skeleton.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you do both bobsled and...
Nope, I just do skeleton.
Okay.
But we're under the same NGB, national governing body, sort of umbrella.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So for those people that have never watched the Olympics or watched it, explain just briefly what skeleton is, because it's something that I don't think I would do.
Yeah. So there's a mile-long ice tunnel track, basically, and we slide headfirst down on our chests and our stomachs. You might see, think of the movie Cool Runnings, which is the bobsled sort of version.
Yeah.
Luge is the feet-first version. But yeah, we're the head-first of that, and we go about 80, 85 miles an hour.
Yeah. That's really cool, and it sounds fun in theory, but then I don't think I would. I think if once I got up to about 40 miles an hour, I'd be like, nah, I need to stop.
Oh, no, not even 40 miles an hour, no. There's no padding or anything like that. I mean, like, you hit something, you crumple head to feet. Not feet to head, right?
If you could ever hit head first, probably. Yeah. And I don't want to think of it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Thanks for that picture.
Yeah, no, don't discourage it. I'm not.
No.
That's not a good thing.
All right.
The hits, for sure, when they come from the side, a lot of people do wear padding.
Okay.
I'm 8 years in, and I'll still throw a piece of foam in there if I'm going to a new track. Because when you grab one of those walls going that fast, it doesn't feel good.
I'm sure.
Yeah. How do they get? So I've always been curious about this. How do they keep those tracks slick? Like, how do they keep because the ice goes all the way up the wall, right? So how do they? I'm guessing they only exist in places where they can keep it cold enough. Is that right?
They should.
Okay.
We're noticing as the weather starts to get a little weird these past 5 years that some of the tracks they have to refrigerate extra, and it's an artificial refrigeration. The tracks are concrete tracks that are sort of, 4 or 5 feet off the ground.
Okay.
And the refrigeration pipes kind of go underneath, and they're run by ammonia or something like that. I'm not.
Yeah. Well, still, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, they spray it with a hose, like. They change the nozzle however they need to lay down the ice, and they just walk up and down this mile-long track. Track crew at every track are phenomenal. Honestly, without them, the sport doesn't exist. So, we kind of have to give them the credit.
Is it kind of like ice hockey where the Zamboni has to come out and, like, because eventually you would think with enough people going down that track, you'd end up with ridges and things in the ice. So
correct.
Do they have to? How often do they, like, resurface it? Is it between every racer?
I would know. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they don't have a Zamboni machine either. It's when people do it, it's literally by hand.
Wow.
So they'll walk down either with scrapers or a bucket of slush, and they'll like patch in gouges if a bobsled, because usually it's bobsled that kind of makes the bigger marks.
Yeah.
But yeah, they call it a spritz. So it'll give you like a fresh sheet of ice before the race, and then after that first heat, they'll spritz it again for the second heat. But everybody within each heat gets whatever ice they get.
Wow.
Is it better to have a fresh track? Like in a heat, do you want to be first or last?
Generally first.
Okay.
Yeah. St. Moritz is sort of the only outlier where it's better to be a little bit later.
Okay.
Because that race usually starts super early. It's not an artificial refrigerated track. It's built in the ground with snow blocks like an igloo.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. It's an insane thing, but it's not artificially refrigerated. And so you got to start the race early, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to show up and like, oh, it's getting a little soft. So because you start early, you also have a little bit of a frosty surface. You don't really think about it. But when you open your freezer, there's kind of a little bit of a film most of the time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's basically what happens to the track, even more so. And so, but as the day goes on a little bit, maybe halfway through that field, the sun starts to hit, the air warms, then it sort of naturally spritzes itself.
Okay.
But every other track, first is, you throw down times if you go first.
Huh. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So for those of you that are regular viewers / listeners, you may be wondering why we're having this conversation, because it seems on the surface to have nothing to do with finance, or banking or money or whatever. But we were kind of talking with Dan and just sort of talking about how you got involved in doing this sport and all the challenges that you have, not only from the athletic side of the sport, but also just being able to live and eat and travel and all those. It's not a typical thing where you can have a normal 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job, right? So so how did you get started with doing the sport? Because it seems like a sport that would not be easy to just sort of like stumble into. But
it wouldn't be my first pick. Yeah, I mean,
most people were like, "Oh, I want to play basketball."
Yeah, or even you skiing or snowboarding for winter sports. But
yeah. So how did you get involved?
Well, I went to Penn State for my degree, and once I graduated, I moved out east for my first career job in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and nothing against the working world, but it's, to me, a lot easier than college was. College was hard, and even with how difficult it was, I still did club sports. I fly fished as much as I could on the weekends. I was always doing something, and then now I went to this job, and you kind of clocked in, clocked out. I went to the gym afterwards, and by the time I got home, I'm like, what else do I do? I was genuinely like bored almost. And I'm like, I need to figure out. So I started Googling things, and, it was winter at the time, but I'm still like, flying football leagues, maybe try to get back into baseball. But because it was winter, I'm like, what's a winter sport I can do? And what do you know? A list of winter Olympic sports pops up, and I was like, whoa. I wasn't thinking about this, but out of curiosity, bobsled is alphabetically, so thank you for bobsled for being a B. But because I didn't want to do bobsled necessarily. I'd click in that link, and they said, you could try out. There's 7-8 tryouts across the country, different cities.
Wow.
So I could train for this and see what happens.
So so when you go to try out for something like this, you said it was like open tryouts.
Yeah.
So I would imagine the equipment and so forth is pretty specific. Do they give you like a rental sled and then say, all right, see how you do? Or is that pretty much what it is?
Absolutely. And then you kind of start from halfway up the track. They kick you down and they, good luck. Some people really like it. Some people will do like, absolutely not. Yeah. You're going only 30 miles an hour. And if they're saying no at 30 miles an hour, then they made the right choice, because they might have liked it after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you brought up the money thing, and I was sort of internally crying because if I knew what it would have costed getting in, I don't think I would have done it.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of happy in a way that I didn't know, but at the same time, I wish I knew.
Yeah.
Well, what is the cost of getting into a sport like this? For competition versus doing it as a hobby?
Yeah. So it really is the traveling, because your flights, your rental cars, your hotels. You're never in the same place, so you're buying a week's worth of food, leaving, going to the next place, going to the next place.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of the moving around that costs a lot, and a lot of these tracks aren't in cheap places.
Yeah.
Some of them are resorts, so you do your best you can to not spend a lot, but like in the beginning, you might only spend $5,000 for a year, but then as you get, better and better and you're traveling every week, World Cup, you're spending $35,000, $40,000. Just to do the traveling, it's like that's not even going above and beyond.
Yeah. So and I'm guessing the equipment and things like that are a cost too.
Yeah.
Now, do you wear like you have like a suit, like a tracksuit or whatever, right? And helmet and so forth. Is that all yours, or does Team USA supply any of that stuff, or how does that work?
Both.
Okay.
So, yeah, so the USABS speed suits that they give us as part of our sort of membership fee, they cost more than the membership fee, to be fair. They're like $1,300 suits.
Oh, wow.
And, our membership fee is like $250. But, yeah, they give us a suit. The helmets we buy ourselves. Oh, sorry. The helmets we buy ourselves. The helmets skeleton out is really hold kind of near and dear. Like if we're going to put sponsors, at least in the U.S., we'll put sponsors on suits. We'll put sponsors on our sleds. Mm-hmm. It's like the helmet, I want to paint it the way that I want to paint it. So,
yeah.
But yeah, it's sort of a teamwork thing to kind of come up with everything that you need to find, because it's not always as easily available.
Yeah, it's such a niche sport. Yeah.
I would imagine you can't walk into Dunham's and buy a speed suit. Like that's just not something you can do. Or Dick's Sporting Goods or something.
Right.
So you said that you start out sort of, you said maybe about $5,000 a year or something like that. You were, but that's because you said you're only doing a few races a year. Is that?
Yes.
So at your level, how many times a year do you race?
So on the World Cup, we have 8 races, but every single one of them is in a different city/country.
Okay.
So that's kind of what makes it tough. And then, you try to do your best on some off weeks to also go to a different track to train. Because, hey, that next race is going to be here, or in 2 weeks it's going to be here. So if I have a week that I can go there, I'm just going to bite the bullet and do it, to up my odds for when we come back. Because it really is a sport of just doing it. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
If you have an off week, you're not talking about, I'm going to go to the town over to train. You're leaving the country to train. So that's where your cost is. A lot of it too. You're not doing. How many tracks are there in the United States?
There are 2 in the U.S. One in Lake Placid, New York. One in Park City, Utah, which is outside of Salt Lake City.
Okay.
There were 2 in Canada. There's now 1. Unfortunately, the Calgary track was where the Jamaican bobsled team got famous for their Olympics up there. But then Whistler is outside of Vancouver. That was the other. So we have 3 or 4 in North America.
Okay. So you're traveling out of the country a lot.
Yeah. The others, there's 14 others.
Okay.
And they're over there.
Wow.
So do you? I know you said about the cost of the travel and so forth, but do you have to pay to enter each race then, or is there a fee for that kind of stuff? Because I would think they have to maintain these tracks and do the maintenance stuff. So I would imagine if they're holding an event there, they're not doing it for free.
Right.
Yeah.
That, and do you win monetary prizes or anything for these races, at least to help cover a little bit of that?
I have some good stories for the prize side, but to go back to your question, we pay race fees. They're honestly not much. It's like 30 euros, $35, $40 US dollars to do a race. But the cost of the slotting usually comes from training. So if you're going to a track, like I said, to train on, you're paying $40, $50 per run.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And if in a season I'm shooting for, 150, 200 runs, pretty quickly, all of a sudden that's a big chunk.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, but forget my question. To answer the fun one. What do you do?
Yeah. So, I have a lot of friends in other countries, which is really cool.
That is cool.
But you sort of, after griping enough, you kind of figure out, why everybody else is doing it. What they sort of do outside of the sport, how much money they get for doing the sport, what they get maybe for winning.
Yeah.
And it might have been an unfortunate thing, because now this is forever burned into my mind. But I was talking to one of my friends on the Chinese team. It was kind of in a fun competition. It was a push competition a few years ago. But I was just saying, after this, I'm gonna have to go back to work. And he's like, "What do you mean work?" I was like, "Oh, I work in architecture." He's like, "This is not your job?" I was like, "No." I was like, "Is this your job?" He's like, "Yes." He's like, "If I had to do something else, I would quit this."
Wow.
I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
No.
He's like, "Yes. This is what I get paid to do." And I was like, "Do you get paid to win races too?" He's like, "Yes. You don't?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" Tell me, man, it's like that movie with wait, you're getting paid?
Oh yeah. We're the Millers or something like that.
Yeah, it's almost like that, And then it came down to hearing what the guy who won bronze for China in their home games, Beijing, is what he was given. for that. And I don't even know if I want to like put them back, but it's a lot.
Wow.
Like in the millions worth of USD. Yeah.
So I mean, I guess they don't have. Do they have? Maybe it's one of those things where they just don't have a lot of professional. Like we have sort of the professional leagues that we follow in the United States.
Yeah.
Baseball, football, NBA, NHL. But beyond that, it falls off pretty steeply. I mean, maybe golf, maybe tennis. You get some pro athletes, but after that, like a lot of the other events, sports, things like that are in the Olympics or things in the U.S., they're just not as popular.
Yeah.
Are they more popular in Europe and stuff?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. Like if you go to just a random hotel or restaurant in Germany, they have the races on replay.
Oh,
It's
wow.
not live. Like they'll be showing bobsled, luge, like in the gym. You'll be like working out and they're watching a luge race.
Yeah.
This is cool. Like I've never seen a luge race on TV or a skeleton or anything like that. So yeah.
Yeah, unless it's the Olympics. Like in the U.S., it's the Olympics, maybe the world events, but that's and it's usually on ESPN, the Ocho. Like
Yeah.
it's
Right. ESPN 12.
which really stinks because what you do is really impressive to me. I honestly don't know that I would have done so. So after you did the 30 mile an hour, sort of halfway up, like, and you kind of obviously liked it.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get to, from doing that first initial run to reaching a point where you were good enough that somebody said, "Hey, do you want to race for the Team USA?"
Right.
Like,
yeah, the timeline could be different for everybody. But I would say between you going from lower to actually going from the top could be maybe a month. You do like a month sort of working your way.
Yeah, like little baby steps.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a month straight. You could be like heading back home and then you come back or whatever.
Yeah.
But eventually you start going from the top and they don't let you run. They just say, hey, just walk it off. But then eventually you start running, and I would say within 3 months of your starting, you're full force sprinting. And then maybe from that point, it could be a year or 2 years before they're like, okay, you can definitely, face some other countries. You might have a run that's really good. You might wipe out the next one. Your consistency is the biggest thing that's not there in the beginning. But yeah, I would say people start showing sort of spurts of quality within a couple years.
Yeah. So, so do you then pick, like, obviously you picked skeleton, right? And so where does that name come from, by the way? Do you know?
Really good question. I feel like everybody that is asked this gives a different answer.
Okay.
Especially like in other countries as well. What I will do is give you a little bit of the history of skeleton.
Okay.
So St. Moritz, which is still the only natural track in the world, that's where the first racing for skeleton, bobsled, all that started.
Okay.
And I could get this a little bit wrong, but generally there's this town of St. Moritz, which is a really awesome, winter sport vacation spot if you've never been there. Actually, it's the jersey that gave you guys.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a town nearby that's a little bit cheaper to stay in called Celerina.
Okay.
And the workers who were working in St. Moritz were staying in Celerina. And to get back, they thought, let's just, carve out a little trail and we'll sled back. And it just started as a basic sort of, workers getting back to their hotels. And then eventually this was in the 1800s. And eventually it started getting a little bit more competitive. And then, of course, wouldn't you know, there were some Great Britain tourists that were there, and they started seeing this, and they started telling their friends about it. All of a sudden, money started getting put into this. They started building official tracks. And then wouldn't you know, 100 years later, they're still building the track in the same place they did. Obviously, it's much better.
Yeah.
And people are going a lot faster, 86, 87 miles an hour head first. But yeah, it all came from, just workers trying to get back.
Had the utility, yeah.
I don't know. I think there's probably a lot of things that are like that if you go back and look at the history of it or whatever. But that's really neat because you would think that, I don't know, you would think that it wouldn't be quite that mundane, I guess, in a way.
Like everybody wants to leave work and get home as quick as they can.
That could be it.
Fred Flintstone on the Brontosaurus tail or something, yeah.
So it could be sort of the lack of intelligence of setting your body head first that they called you're a skeleton. Or it could actually be the thing that we lay in. Our saddle is sort of ribbed looking. Okay. So some people say that, just looking at the sled, it looks kind of like a skeleton.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what made you decide skeleton versus bobsled? Or, head first versus feet first?
Sure. I think part of it has to do with what you think you'd be good at.
Okay.
Yeah. So like the bobsledders, it would be awesome if there was one sitting next to me. You'd see the difference.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like if I sat upright, their shoulders would be right here, this much wider. They're just big. They're like football players.
Wow.
They're big dudes because the sled they're pushing is 400 pounds.
Okay.
Versus the sled I'm pushing is like 80 pounds.
So does weight play into this? Like, is it better to be a skinny skeleton rider or a larger, have more mass for faster? Or does that work?
If you can be skinny and heavy, that's the best of both worlds.
Okay.
Because aerodynamics definitely has a play. So does weight. And people were like, well, if you did a free fall, I don't know who's saying this, but it's true. If you did a free fall between a light object and a heavy object, they're hitting the ground at the same time, right? But when you're going down ice and there's a little bit of texture on the ice, now you have surface friction. And a heavier object is going to overcome that surface friction better than a lighter object. So you definitely are trying to get to the maximum weight that you can, which for us is a combined 120 kilos.
Okay.
Sled, helmet, body, everything. We're trying to get as close to that as possible just to give us an advantage.
Huh.
Wow. So, so you even said that one of the things is, you're moving from place to place so often.
Yep.
And that has to make it difficult to eat healthy. And I mean, really, because typically whenever you're on vacation, like when I'm on vacation, I'm eating at restaurants, I'm eating at fast food, whatever. But in your case, if you're trying to maintain a certain weight, a certain physique, obviously you're not going to be me. I say that self-deprecatingly, but you're not going to be me going down the ice and being successful, even though I'm heavy, because I'm not aerodynamic. So, how does that work? Like, is that expensive? Like, does that play into it too?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everywhere you go, you could just say, I don't feel like cooking. I'm just going to eat out every day. Yeah.
And
as athletes, because we work out so much, you probably wouldn't notice a huge impact immediately, but in the long term, you would. Even if it wasn't in your body weight, you would feel lethargic. You wouldn't perform, at your top. So it's definitely important to, at least 5 days a week, if you're going to cheat on those other 2 days, 5 days a week, try to, make something that's pretty clean. A lot of us just kind of stick with something that we know, so even if it's just making a pot of rice and then, something simple with a chicken or a beef, or, a pasta or something, but not really venturing out that much. And if we do eat out somewhere, try to stick it to the proteins, because those are the biggest things that, are the hardest things to get usually.
Yeah.
Restaurants usually like to sell carbs. It's easy to get carbs and fats.
Yeah.
Yeah, unlimited breadsticks, or that kind of stuff,
Exactly.
Though it may be healthier to eat in different countries than in the U.S. I mean, we're not the healthiest country.
You can eat the same things there. Like, you can have finish a loaf of bread in 3 days worth of sandwiches. You will not have the same weight impact as you did if you were. And I don't want to there's obviously a lot of science that goes into this, but just anecdotally, I lose weight every time I'm in Europe. And hey, maybe stress is involved in that, because I'm competing and then, there's all those things going on. Sure. But even when I was in Europe in 2012 for my study abroad, I came back 15 pounds lighter. And I am going to tell you, I did not cut out any meals. I ate as much as I could every meal, and I still came back 15 pounds lighter.
Wow.
Makes you think.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there's an issue to some degree in the U.S. with, and I know we're kind of getting a little off topic, but the idea that, the United States is so huge, and not everywhere in the United States is necessarily good for growing certain things. So if you want wheat, right, and breads and things like that, you have to get it from basically the Midwest,
sure.
And so that has to be farmed, and then it has to be, trucked or trained or somehow transported to the other part. So there's a lot more preservatives and things like that where, if you're in Italy is as big as right. Yeah. So it's a little easier to get fresh
100%
food and stuff like that over there. But still, that's, so how do you said you're in architecture?
Yeah.
So you do have a job.
Yeah.
How does that work with your training?
It's changed a lot over the years. I used to be a full-time salary, and I would take PTO to kind of do these camps or whatever, these sliding camps. And then the more serious you get, you start racing. You're like, man, I don't have enough PTO for this. Can I take this time off, or can I take my computer with me and try to work on these projects? And then I started at a different company, and now I eventually moved to North Carolina. I still work out of North Carolina, Charlotte, but I live up in Lake Placid, New York, so I work fully remotely. But in this process, we figured out that switching to part-time, not having any benefits, literally removing all of my benefits, PTO, anything you think of, insurance, and then building that amount into my hourly rate. So if I worked a whole year, I would get paid the same as if I was on salary.
Okay.
Right. So
yeah,
it was kind of a clever, thing they came up with.
That's pretty cool that you found a company that was willing to work with you to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty impressive because not a lot of companies would take the time and effort to come up with something like that for you. So that's awesome.
I've seen a lot of people come from something, a little more stable, and then just getting, axed.
Mm-hmm.
And, they sort of went from their corporate job into waiting tables, in nearby town or Lake Placid. Some people do a lot of miscellaneous things, walking dogs, cleaning houses, whatever they can think of to kind of scrape up some money.
Wow.
It's a weird, and it's not just my sport. Really, it's any U.S. like Olympic level sport.
Mm-hmm.
And that's ironic because you brought up the sort of the big five sports in the U.S.
Yeah.
People love watching that.
Yeah.
And I love it too. Don't get me wrong, but it's like there's not a lot they got to worry about, versus all these other sports, which are super cool, but they don't get the TV time because they don't have all those advertising rights and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and even like at the college level, I mean, it's getting ridiculous how much money is going into college athletes and things like that too, I mean, and the transfer portals and things like that, where, I mean, it's almost like you're not really going to college anymore. No. You're just you're playing football and you happen to
you get a piece of paper to play football.
Yeah, and that's great if you're good enough to do that. I mean, I'm not, but don't pretend, let's not pretend that this is an activity for the school anymore, right? I mean, there's a lot of money going into this, right? So how else do you, obviously you have a job, but I mean, but do you also get sponsorships? Do you get I know you said you were putting stuff, you said put sort of like sponsors and stuff on your suits and stuff, but so how do you do that? Like how, if you want to get into one of these kinds of sports, and like you said, if you had known how much money it was going to cost, you might not have, but what do you do other than try to work as hard as you can when you can? Like, how do you get the money to do it?
Yeah. Well, and the trick is working as hard as you can for as little time as you can, because the more time you take away from training, sure, I can afford the season, but I suck, Yeah. And that's not what we want either.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt that in the beginning of my career. Like I was like, okay, I need to change this balance. I'm a little heavy on the working side. But yeah, for the support stuff, for me personally, the hometown has been huge. Everybody in Johnstown sharing, talking about it, hey, I have a friend who owns this business. I wonder if he'd be interested. Just that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
My mom works at AmeriServ, with you guys, and, she talked to you guys in marketing, and, just getting the story out there, it's been amazing. Like if I would, I guess, make a pyramid without my parents, family, everybody in Johnstown, there's like no sport endeavor.
Yeah.
I came into the sport with some savings, and honestly, that's really the only way that I was able to make it work for the first few years, because I had a job and I also had some savings. But I used all that. So now it's like, all right, Olympics is next year. Let's make this happen.
Yeah. So without the, sort of putting an elephant in the room. So the Olympics is the goal. Like, is that okay? What really is involved in doing that? Like, does I don't imagine that there's a large, there's how can I say this? There's not as many people vying for spots on a skeleton team as there are, say, the Penn State football team, right?
Great point. Yeah.
But I'm sure there's more than just you.
Yeah.
So what's the goal? Like, how does the goal happen for you to reach that? Do you have to place so well in so many races, or how does that work?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So, and a lot of times when we think of like, where do we need to get to, rank wise in order to make it to a certain level, a lot of times you think of like internally, like I got to beat my teammate, or, oh, he's doing this, I got to do that.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a little bit of that, but realistically, what takes you to either World Championships or an Olympics is hitting a quota spot when ranked against the other country sliders. So not to get too deep into this, but as an example, in the Olympics, the top 2 countries will get 3 sleds. The next 7 countries will get 2 sleds. And then the next 9 countries will get 1. And it's all based off of individually ranked people. So if me, I'm currently ranked 2nd in the U.S., if me as a 2nd ranked slider is better than 9 other countries, the 9 other top countries' 2nd ranked slider, then I will go to the Olympics.
Okay.
If I'm number 10, then I'm the first sled that misses. And now U.S. only gets 1 sled. So now I have to be the best U.S. sled, right? So it's not an internal fight.
Yeah.
Much of it is, across other countries.
Okay. So, and then, so you sort of mentioned that there was you have had conversations with people that have said that, oh, well, this is my job, this is what I do. What about training? Yeah. Like, do you have trainers? Like, do you work with trainers in the U.S. exclusively? Are there? I don't know how many. I guess my question is, how many people are really trained and skilled enough to teach this?
Yeah.
For people, like, is it something that where you go outside the U.S. or are there people here in the U.S. that do this?
Great question. Before 2 years ago, everybody sort of had their own guy to go to. It could have been a college track coach. It could have been somebody that in the gym that they hired.
Mm-hmm.
There was this in shape dude that went to the gym that I lived at in Orlando, and I was already in pretty good shape because I was training, but the direction might not have been there, so I was like, hey, I'm going to be trying out for this team in like 6 months. Can you give me some, can I work with you? Mm-hmm. And so I ended up doing that for, 10 sessions or whatever, which was eye-opening in some ways, because it sort of showed you where your weaknesses and, strengths were. Mm-hmm. But then 2 years ago, we hired a coach from Great Britain. He used to slide skeleton for Great Britain, but then he got into sports science and sort of strength and conditioning.
Okay.
So he worked with them a little bit. Then he actually went to China and worked with them that whole quad. They all saw great push numbers improvements. And then somehow we convinced him to come to the U.S., and he has like this joint contract between skeleton and luge. Mm-hmm. But we've been working with him. Last summer was the first full summer that I worked with him. And when I say I trained hard in high school football, like everybody, they put you through it.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's not science-based. They just put you through it to put you through it.
Yeah.
But I think that this last summer's training was harder than that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like the next 2 weeks for me before my off-season starts, I have to do sort of pre-training training. Because if I just go into my off-season training, I won't make it or I'll hurt myself. So I actually have to do 2 weeks of sort of preparation training to get ready for him.
So during the off season, you're mostly in the gym. Do you travel outside of the country to do any of this?
I travel as little as possible when I'm not competing. It's just
so in the wintertime, that's when you're on the track, and in the summertime, you're in the gym.
In the gym, sprinting on regular running track, something like that.
Yeah, because I guess that's where you build up most of your. I mean, that's your. How far is it at the top? Like about 100 feet, something like that
for sprinting. Yeah, it's about 100 feet.
So, I did that just by watching TV. I was like, oh,
that's good. Yeah, it's like I think in meters, because we do everything over there.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
30 meters. Yeah, it's about 100 feet. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're sprinting for 100 feet, and then you're throwing your. Now, I guess it's got to be easy. Do luge guys? How do they get on their sled then?
Oh, you need to watch a race.
Yeah,
it's fun watching them. It's actually fun watching them train too, because it's So basically, I'm here. I've got to get away from the mic again.
Yeah, that's right.
They have these handles that come out, and they sort of like rock back and forth until they get enough momentum that they rip them.
Oh, okay.
And they do these little paddles.
Okay.
Yeah.
I tried it. I wish I had this video prepared. I might have to send it to you and see if you can clip it in. But I tried luge in their start house. It is not as easy as you think it would be.
Huh.
Yeah, they sort of paddle their way down the ramp.
But that's got to be like all upper body strength then.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? As opposed to where you probably focus more on the legs and like sort of overall.
Because that's how you're steering and stuff, right? With your legs.
I literally don't do upper body.
Yeah.
Like we were trying to get our coach to let us do last year because guys like to have fun and do bench or whatever. He's like, no. You're not doing upper body because it's an aerodynamic thing.
Oh, right.
And it's like you also want your weight to be sort of in the middle. It just helps with sliding.
So so you were talking a little bit technique whenever we talked last week, a little bit sort of in prep of this, and you said I did not know this. You're basically balancing on your rails, right? So it's not really
like a teeter-totter, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a sled like whenever you go down the hill whenever you're a kid and it's just this big flat piece of plastic and you just like you're really balancing on a very narrow point of balance, right? On the middle. Yep. So where do you get the equipment for this? I mean, I know we kind of made that joke before, like you can't just walk into Dunham's or something, but where do you get the equipment? Do you have to specially make it? Is there special companies that do this? How does that?
Yeah. So to back up, we can talk about the runners in particular, the rails.
Yeah.
The steel that comes from those is sort of strictly governed. It has to have the International Bobsled and Skeleton Federation logo stamped on the steel.
Okay.
In very exact measured locations.
Yeah.
And if you don't use their steel, when they check your sleds in the races and stuff like that, they'll know. And you'll get disqualified. So you have to use this exact steel. You can make your own runners, but you just have to buy the steel from them. And it's in 2 locations in Europe. Most people are going to be buying their equipment, both the sled and the runners, from one of the common manufacturers. One is a guy in the UK, Bromley is what we call it. And then this other guy is in Germany, and it's a Schneider. And a lot of people use both. I've been using a Schneider sled for the last 4 years. He makes the runners and the sled. A lot of these top countries, and it is nothing against these equipment makers, but a lot of these top countries make their own. And part of it is because maybe they figure something out that they want to try. But it's also like, hey, if we want to make something, I don't want to have to order it from some other country and wait for it to get here. The U.S. used to make their own.
Okay.
In 2014, if you did a little bit of Wikipedia searching, you would see we did pretty well in bobsled and skeleton in the 2014 games. And for whatever reason, I'm assuming funding, that program sort of stopped. So in the last 10 years, U.S. has been using either leftover things from that program, which is not being innovated anymore, or bought it from a standard manufacturer.
Okay.
So the goal is to try to get back into the realm of making your own equipment and be competitive like that.
Well, how do they control the, I don't know, the quality, not the quality, but like the composition of the rails then? Like if every country can make their own, and all you have to do is put a stamp on this thing. I mean, how do they?
They could, in theory, you could like fake a stamp, I guess.
They don't test the metal as what I'm getting at, I guess.
They do test. I honestly don't know how they do it. There used to be like their hardness tests had like this like steel pin, and they'd put a gun up to it, and basically how that pin would tell you how hard the steel is. I'm not sure if they still use that method anymore, if they're kind of doing more of like a electromagnet scanning or something like that, electron scanning. But they try their best to say everybody's using the same material. The design of that material is up to you. So you can bend it different ways. The grooves that you cut into it for steering could be different shapes. How you sand it, kind of make it shiny, could be different. Yeah.
So there's a little customization that you can do. Okay.
Yeah, this sounds like an oversimplification, but it's kind of like, whenever you're a kid and you're making paper airplanes.
Or Pinewood Derby car.
Pinewood Derby cars. Yeah, that's an excellent analogy, but even with the weight.
Oh yeah.
Because I think that a lot of people think that, like, oh, if I just make my Pinewood Derby car like super aerodynamic, but it's super lightweight, you lose every time. Like it's the weight that gets you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy you brought Pinewood Derby up. Yeah, that was a big moment in my life.
Really?
Oh, so I also became a woodworker. I don't do a lot of it now that I'm a skeleton, but I'm a passionate woodworker, and I swear a lot of that came from your first car your dad kind of makes for you.
Oh yeah.
But we won, first place, and man, that was a moment for me. I'm like, wait, you can go down in the basement, do some stuff on the chop saw, and you can win something. So that was a huge moment for me. Just in sort of learning that these things are possible. But yeah, like, the contact of the wheels on the ice is like runners. The weight of the sled is like your body. You show up light. Aerodynamics, keep your shoulders down. Yeah. Pinewood Derby is such a great comparison.
Yeah. That's why. That's cool. That's right. So when do you find out, for example, you said that obviously your ultimate goal is to try to make the Olympic team, explain this to me. So you're kind of on the Olympic team now, right?
So like the quota things that I explained, that sort of stuff is figured out after, like, through the competitive year coming in.
Okay.
So like this year that I'm training for, from November to February, are those races that will rank us for qualifying for the games.
Okay.
Yeah. So like where I was ranked this past year was enough to qualify for world championships. And that was my third, in a row that I qualified for. So the goal is to kind of do the same thing, but a little bit better, because the qualification for the Olympics is a little bit tighter.
Okay.
And unfortunately, that is all about TV rights.
Oh,
so
gotcha.
NBC basically says, hey, skeleton, men and women, these are how many sleds we'll give you time for.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of good sliders who don't make the cut then because of that. So the goal is to get into that cut.
Wow. That's really cool. I cannot imagine. I've seen over the years, they usually have TV commercials, things like that, like leading up to the Olympics, during the Olympics, of people that are in these kinds of sports, and you wonder sometimes how they got into it. And the fact that you could get into something like this and end up on the Olympic team by simply just going like, man, I need something else to do. I'm just going to Google like winter sports. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fascinating, because it just goes to show sometimes that you don't always realize what
you can do anything. Yeah, you can do anything. Yeah.
If you just try and put yourself out there instead of just assuming you can't do it.
Yeah.
So when your parents, when you started getting better at this,
Yeah.
and you said your parents were probably like are the top of that pyramid you mentioned in terms of funding and things like that. Like,
Yeah.
what did they say whenever you said like, hey, Mom, Dad, I want to be, I decided I want to be a skeleton slider.
Yeah. So I definitely didn't tell them right away.
Yeah.
I should say I didn't tell them when I was training for it,
Okay.
because I was still working full time. Why stir something that might not even happen?
Mm-hmm.
Let me just put my head down, focus, see what happens. I ended up making, qualifying for the trip to the training center, and I was like, man, I need to tell them now. Like, this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go and try this thing, So I'm just gonna head up to the Olympic Training Center. Like, what? Yeah, I'm like, there's this thing that I tried out for, and I earned enough points, So I'm just gonna see how it goes. And well, yeah, there's a little bit of second guessing, but all right, like, have fun. You went up there, did that, you earned enough points again. And like, okay, we're gonna put you on the ice now, and you slid. I made sure I had a GoPro on, because not only did I want to remember this, I wanted them to see it. And you look like you are cooking.
Yeah.
And you're going 30 miles an hour. Like, you feel like, where am I?
Yeah,
I'm sure.
So I'm sure there was hesitation in the beginning, and they would tell you the same thing. But as the progression kind of continued and I started racing, that quickly turned into, go faster, what are you doing?
Yeah. Are there skeleton moms? Or is it, it's just, like,
Is there a club? Yeah.
Yeah, like the baseball dad.
Yeah, you get the soccer moms, the baseball dads, and no, that's, so, and then whenever you first, so I guess at some point you had to be like, well, I need some cash to kind of, like, were you trying to fund all this on your own at first?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Like, I was just kind of stubborn in this. I'm thinking this was my thing. Why I'm not going to ask, because the first suggestion was making GoFundMe's and that stuff. And I'm like, I can't, what am I doing that for? People do that for XYZ, like medical things like that. Like, this was my choice. And so I did the best I could, working full time, paying for it, working full time. And it was kind of happening, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you started to have to travel more, and you're like, oh, shoot, this is not going to work, So I put up my first GoFundMe, and ended up doing, pretty well. I don't remember the amount, but it was, a few $1,000s. And it helped finish the season. And then I realized, now based on how I race, I'm going to be going up higher, and once that happens, you're like, okay, I need to make a plan.
Yeah.
And fortunately for some of the new guys coming in, we tell them this right away.
Yeah.
When I came in, that wasn't really a thing that was, expressly shared. And the costs have changed over the years.
You were one of the guys that was building the track in St. Moritz, right? For the first ones, like,
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So at least in this economy,
Yeah.
like, everything is. I've been doing this for 8 years. 5-6 years ago, the cost of going to Europe was so much cheaper. And it's not even just going to Europe, but the cost of everything. Rental cars, getting a week's worth of groceries. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's you just got to play the game.
Yeah.
We had switched topics pretty quick, but I wanted to go back to something. Just talking about sponsorships. Do you have like obligations or criteria? So if you get a sponsor, what do you have to do? What does that mean?
Right.
Like you said, you put their logo on your shirt.
Yeah.
Do you have to do anything else? Or?
No, that's a great question. So there's sort of one thing that I sign every year, and the goal is to not sign it.
Okay.
But it's the USA Bobsled Skeleton Marketing Agreement.
Okay.
When you sign that agreement, they give you a little bit of money. But there's a bunch of verbiage in there that, limits what you can show for other sponsors, stuff like this. Talks about logo sizes, the placement, where you're allowed to put that on your sled, where it can be on a jacket. If you're warming up for a race, can't be in X, Y, these places,
Okay.
So I do the best that I can to fit those parameters because I signed the marketing agreement.
Sure, yeah.
And get, the few $1,000s that they give. The goal is to have enough sponsors where I don't sign anything and there's nothing, controlling me. So, I'm just, throwing something out there. If AmeriServ was, a $10,000 sponsor and I didn't sign the marketing agreement, maybe the whole sled says AmeriServ.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Because I signed the marketing agreement, I have to stick within, a parameter of inches.
Right.
And it has to be in a certain location, which is kind of on the bottom of the
So you're on the rear quarter panel of the NASCAR, like in tiny, as opposed to being on the hood.
Exactly it. And it's like you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. But it's like if you build yourself sort of the freedom that you need, and you don't have to, work into the parameters, it can get really awesome. Like I could be wearing what's a cool energy, I could look like an energy drink bottle if I wanted.
Does anybody help you get sponsorships, or this is all on your own type thing?
It's largely on our own, and honestly, teammates and just family. We each were like, oh, I heard about this guy. He seems like something that's either close to you or something you would like. You want to reach out to them? There's a lot of, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But
So talk about your brand.
Yeah.
Because you're wearing, you have sort of a brand on, right? So yeah. So what? Yeah. There you go. Plug. So you came up with the brand basically to help with this, right?
Yeah. Mystique Rowe, my teammate, and I were sitting down. It was like our first year, and we were in Park City. It was like the first time we were not at Lake Placid. We're like brand new, didn't know anything about it. That was going to we were like, we need to come up with something to demarcate ourselves. And so we kind of sat down and started sketching, and I came up with mine, and she has hers. But basically the goal was moving forward, we are going to brand our journeys under what they are. And I thought this was clever what she came up with, because obviously my last name and the sort of anything else that Miracle on Ice, things all this. It just seemed to work. People liked it. Yeah. So it's the Instagram handle, it's the Facebook handle. I do have the rights to it for a website, so the goal is to get that up and running before this coming year. But it's been really fun. People seem to have enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Where is the best place to follow your journey? If somebody wants to learn more about you.
Most people are probably going to find it easiest just on Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah, or Instagram. But my goal is to be putting more stuff. The website I think will be a good landing page. Because a lot of stuff you're going to see on Facebook and Instagram are sort of just recaps on, a story or something, a race. But I'm hoping to be putting a lot more on the website, maybe things, to buy.
Yeah.
Maybe links to the past races, just real cool active stuff.
Yeah. For anybody that is interested in doing like some sort of help, do you have a GoFundMe or anything? Like what's out there that you could, if somebody was listening and wanted to float you some cash to get you to wherever you need to go next, what would be the best way to do that?
So the cool thing now is just last year we came up with a nonprofit that's specifically designed for bobsled and skeleton athletes, and it's helped a lot of people so far. So it's fantastic. But the nonprofit is called Project Push to Gold Fund.
Okay.
So if you go to projectpushtogoldfund.org, you can donate to U.S. athletes, and it goes direct. There's no service fees. There's no, because it's run by the athletes.
Okay.
And so it's like it goes directly to whatever it needs to go to. If you want to donate it for to help with equipment, or if you want to donate to help with somebody's travel season, that's a direct link.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool, because I think in today's world especially, people feel passionate about certain things and they want to be able to feel like they're a part of it. And sometimes the only way to be a part of something like this, honestly, is to sort of feel like you helped somebody move their journey, their dream forward, And I think that we see a lot of that online these days, of just people saying, well, I donated to this, that, or the other thing. I don't know how much you probably too young to remember. There was a TV show on in the 80s called Knight Rider. Okay. And it was a TV show about a guy that drove a Trans Am, and it was like a talking car and stuff like that. But there's literally a guy out there now that found the original trailer, like the original equipment or whatever that was used in the filming, and they're restoring it, and people are donating like crazy to this kind of thing, you know. And so I'm just saying, like, there are people out there that really would like to help you realize a lifelong dream, an 8-year dream, to be able to do this. Because how long can you slide? Like, how long can you do this at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be 35 by the time the Olympics comes around. I would say once you're sort of 40 to 42, you're kind of pushing the edge.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 athletes on our team right now that are kind of in the 40, 44 athletes on the team, and they're honestly very good athletes.
Yeah.
But you're kind of pushing it, you know, at that point. Your sliding probably continues to improve. Like, it's kind of like golf. Like, maybe you're doing your best golf at 70 years old, you know, but you're not hitting it as far.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So it's like the push matters so much. So it's sort of like, where can that push sort of match the sliding quality trajectory?
Yeah, that has to be crazy. Like, you have to be. There's really, I can't think of a similar thing that you could do to mimic that kind of motion, that kind of thing, unless you're actually doing it.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah,
a lot of people have said like rock climbing or any kind of like balancing sport, anything just to sort of work on body control.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've ever seen people do like the slack lining. It's almost like a tightrope. Yeah. So I have a slack line that I put up between a couple trees and just mess around with that. But
very cool.
I wanted to say you brought up the people supporting and want to be part of journeys and stuff like that. I think the important thing to remember is, especially for U.S. athletes, this is not an individual journey.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, even though it's me sliding down the ice, like, every step, and it sounds cliche, but it's genuinely true. Every step of the way, it's the people that put into it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's almost like a company with investors.
Yeah.
You know, the company wouldn't have done anything, you know, without investors, without stockholders.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is, in a way. You know, I wish that there was dividends to pay out.
Yeah.
Maybe seeing a logo or something is enough, or seeing me on TV, but it's really a whole team thing.
Wow. That's really fantastic. I mean, I honestly wish that we could talk. Like, I could talk to you all day. I really think this is just fascinating stuff. I mean, but I think the big thing is just to realize that, first of all, like, this was not something that you're not some of the athletes that you said about that literally their governments or their countries or whatever sort of channel them into doing this. They kind of look at certain athletes at a certain age and they say, oh, well, your bone structure suggests that you're a gymnast,
right?
And that's what you're going to be now.
Yep.
And whether they want to be a gymnast or not, you chose to do this. And I think that is probably the most admirable thing, is that when people say to you, like, oh, what did you say the athlete said? If I had to work, I wouldn't do this. You know, I would stop doing this.
Yeah.
But you're doing this because you have a passion for it, and you're willing to work your butt off to make that happen.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in saying, hey, listen, you know what? I'm in between training and trying to eat and traveling and getting to go to, how many tracks did you say there are around the world? 16 tracks in the entire planet that I can go to train on this. I could use a little bit of help. You know.
I think I'm addicted to the challenge, you know, because whether it was this sport or something else, who knows, if that wasn't alphabetically listed, I might have been trying something else.
Yeah.
You know, or getting into, painting. There's always something that I'm just trying to challenge myself, you know, and that's why I like woodworking. That's why I got into the sport. It's like what you brought up earlier. It's like, just try.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the country that we live in, especially.
Oh yeah,
you can just.
You have the freedom to do whatever you want.
Yeah. And it's like, I was talking to my mom about this because she's pretty artistic herself, and she has some paintings that she's working on. And I'm like, when you come home from work, like, I'm just like pumped to do the next thing. You know, I've always been that way. Like, after I finished practice for sports, I went down into our basement. I was woodworking, or I went outside and I was trying to do something else. You know, just who knows? Who cares? Like, failure doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, just try something new.
I wish I had that energy.
Well, you know, but I think that what you just said is something that's important, because I think a lot of younger people have this notion, and I think it's because of social media and the fact that so many people see the successes that other people achieve without realizing just exactly how much effort and time and failure actually went into, you know, nobody puts that out there. Yeah. And then, so we're having an entire generation of people now that are growing up believing that they should be instantly successful at something. without having all of those failures in along the way.
Yep.
And I think that you learn a lot more from failure than you do from success.
Mm-hmm.
Success is sort of an accident of failure, of repeated failure.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing too, I think, for people to realize, is that this is not something that you Googled this and you decided I want to do this, but it took you 8 years to reach where you are right now. It wasn't something.
And I'm still nowhere near like a peak. Like it's just you just got to keep doing it.
Yeah. And on top of that, I think the other side of that too is that it kind of like this, like nobody was interviewing you for a podcast when you Googled this and went to your first thing, so people seem to think that again, it's, he was an overnight success. No, he just looks that way because now he's getting the attention, I guess, from it. But nobody was paying you any of that attention for the last 8 years or 6 years or whatever. So, you got anything else, Jeff? What do you got?
No, I think I went through all of my stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the poor man's got a 9-hour car ride now.
So we'll cut him free. We'll cut him free.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, seriously, thank you so much for doing this. I mean, this has been a very interesting conversation, and I hope that it's one that people watching and listening can sort of take something from and just understand that, you can make something like this happen. And from a financial standpoint, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
It's not always easy, but it's not something that's impossible either.
Right.
So plug your brand one more time. We'll make sure we get that. Yeah. See, there you go. Yeah. Yeah. And we'll put some links in the descriptions and stuff for you too. So if people want to make donations to the organizations and stuff like that, we can.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much where we're at.
We'd love to have you back as you continue down your journey. Yeah,
oh, man, absolutely. I'd love to come back.
Yeah, we'd love for you to come back too. Yeah, come in and come back. You can show off your medals whenever you're.
Yeah. Yes.
We really hope so. That'd be awesome. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. This podcast focuses on having valuable conversations on various topics related to banking and financial health. The podcast is grounded in having open conversations with professionals and experts with the goal of helping to take some of the mystery out of financial and related topics, as learning about financial products and services can help you make more informed financial decisions. Please keep in mind that the information contained within this podcast and any resources available for download from our website or other resources relating to Bank Chats is not intended and should not be understood or interpreted to be financial advice. The hosts, guests, and production staff of Bank Chats expressly recommend that you seek advice from a trusted financial professional before making financial decisions. The hosts of Bank Chats are not attorneys, accountants, or financial advisors, and the program is simply intended as one source of information. The podcast is not a substitute for a financial professional who is aware of the facts and circumstances of your individual situation.
Every 2 or 4 years, depending on whether you're differentiating between the summer and winter versions, the United States marvels at the talent and skill that Olympic athletes put on display, and buy Wheaties boxes with photos of gymnasts or skiers on the package. We temporarily elevate people like Tara Lipinski or Michael Phelps to A-list celebrity status in the name of national pride. But when the closing ceremonies come to an end, most of these athletes return to their daily lives, spending the next 206 weeks training in obscurity until their next chance comes around. Or doesn't. The United States does very little to provide funding for the athletes we celebrate for 17 days every 2 years. They work, save, and seek donations for the chance to turn their dreams into reality. Parents who want to see their child succeed often bear a large part of the financial burden. Even the parents of some of the most recognizable athletes, like the mother of gymnast Gabby Douglas, have cited the cost of training as a factor in why she had to file for bankruptcy. In talking with our guest, Dan Barefoot, today, Jeff and I were both inspired by his incredible work ethic. This is a man who loves what he does so much that he's willing to put in the hard work and long hours to achieve it. And we certainly wish him the best and would ask that, if you're inclined, you would consider checking out the links in the description where you might be able to help. AmeriServ Presents Bank Chats is produced and distributed by AmeriServ Financial Incorporated. Music by Rattlesnake Milo and Andrew Kalidkin. Executive producer, Jeffrey Matevish. Subscribe to the show and check out all of our episodes on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. For now, I'm Drew Thomas. So long.